Mr. Parker, how you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for taking this time out with me, sir.
You're welcome. I appreciate it. Thanks for the invite.
Yes, sir. Appreciate you for coming on here, ladies and gentlemen. The sports journalist himself, Rob Parker, on the Chris Gunther show. Mr. Parker, first things first, how are you guys up there? Are you safe? Are you guys good?
Yes, we're hanging in LA. I'm just trying to get this camera straight. We're hanging in LA. Yeah, everything is good right now. So we're thankful, safe, healthy.
Definitely safe, thankful, and healthy. And, this is a very tough time in this country right now with everything going on. What advice would you give to those of us that are just falling on hard times? We see everything going on, but we're trying to remain positive and we're trying to keep our heads up. What advice do you have for us?
Yeah, I mean, you just said it. You really have to be. This too shall pass. It's not the end of the world. There have been hard times, bad times, and you got to be able to understand and work through things. That things weren't like they were before. Things have changed. You might not be able to do the same things you used to do, at least right now, but it doesn't mean that can't change. So I'm always thankful for what I have, even if it's less than what I had before.
Yes, I definitely know how that feels. We definitely miss sports. Sports was a huge part of my daily life and my daily culture. How have you been able to adjust with the whole, NBA shutting down, no MLB at the moment? How have you been able to adjust to this?
Yeah, I mean, it's very different. I mean, I love sports. Obviously it's my business, but I watch sports during baseball season. There's a baseball game on my house every night on my TV.
Yes.
So it's a little different to not have that. And obviously we've missed the NBA playoffs so far, and hopefully that'll all shake out. But again, it's about making adjustments, and Chris Broussard and I are still doing our radio show, The
Yes.
Odd Couple on Fox Sports Radio, 7 to 10 p.m. Eastern. Um, and we haven't been, we've been able to make do with the stuff going on. Obviously, the Jordan documentary gave us some stuff to talk about, but
Yes.
also some original information and stuff that we've come together with. So you just can't like throw in the towel and say, well, there's nothing to talk about or nothing to do. There are things that you can dive into, and we've been able to do that.
I'm glad you brought up Chris Broussard. He's a mentor of mine, and he wanted me to tell you this. I don't know what it means, but he wanted me to call you Felix.
No, I'm Oscar. He's Felix.
Okay, I'm only relaying the message. So I'm like, all
Wow.
right, I
Okay,
don't know
I
what it
got that.
is, but all right, that's
You know
between
what? You know
y'all.
what? For people who don't know, the original TV show called The Odd Couple, there are two characters, Felix and Oscar. Felix is the finicky, clean photographer, and Oscar is the gruff, manly sports writer. So he's trying to say that I'm Felix, I'm the finicky, clean guy, and he's the macho sports writer. So tell him I got him.
I definitely will. What is it like to work with him on The Odd Couple?
It's a lot of fun. Chris and I have known each other for more than 25 years. We met back in 1992 at the National Association of Black Journalists Convention. And, obviously we've known each other. We worked at ESPN together. We never really
Yes.
thought about doing a radio show together. So this was all new. And love it. Just absolutely love it. We are really, when you people come up with a name for a show, The Odd Couple, people think, okay, yeah, well, we're playing a role. I'm this, he's that. I'm against this, he's for that, or and it's not legit or genuine. Chris and I are really the odd couple. And when it comes to sports, we see things differently.
Yes, you guys do.
We really, really do. And so when we go back and forth and argue and fight with each other, it's really natural, and it's real. So it's been a pleasure. We've been doing the show for almost a year and a half now, and I enjoy it.
You guys have definitely had a lot of success. You had some pretty cool people on, and you actually got a chance to hit on the Last Dance documentary. What did you think about the Last Dance documentary?
Well, I was covering the NBA during those days. I was an NBA beat writer for the Daily News in New York. I covered the Nets for 3 years. I covered the Knicks for a year. So I was around that. I was there when Michael Jordan made that shot over Craig Elo. I was sitting center courtside, covering that game. I was in Detroit when Scottie Pippen had the migraine. I was sitting there covering that game. I was at Chicago Stadium many Memorial Days watching Michael Jordan in big playoff games. So a lot of that stuff I knew about because I was a part of the NBA family back then. But the behind-the-scenes stuff, the footage and stuff that I had never seen, I thought that was all good. And I knew what it was going to be. I mean, Jordan had the final say on the documentary, so he was going to be able to steer it the way he wants and put his stamp on it. So I wasn't expecting it to be some journalistic, documentary that looks into everything and turns over every stone and gives you the full story. It was a story seen through Jordan's eyes, which is what I expected. I enjoyed it.
Do you feel that the documentary, in a sense, stained his image or stained the legacy that he already has?
No, I think it actually enhanced it, especially for millennials. I think that you saw the ESPN poll where he swept all 17 categories against LeBron, and that was because a lot of millennials who just saw him on YouTube or watching games or video highlights never really had his career in context. I think when you watch that story, it's more compelling to tell you all the stuff he had to overcome, how tough it was to win, and once he broke through, he continued to win. I think that documentary smashed LeBron James, to be honest. When even the people who are LeBron James fans and maybe thought he was really in that conversation, when you look back, it's hard to argue with a guy who went through everything he went through, was 6-0 in the NBA Finals, won all 6 MVPs, and how he dominated. He beat 21 Hall of Famers during his playoff runs and championship runs, and he kept 10, 11 of those guys from winning championships during his era. I think Michael Jordan's the documentary elevated him. It didn't hurt him.
Do you still have Jordan as the greatest of all time?
Without question. There's no doubt in my mind.
ESPN recently put out a list of the top 5 players. They had LeBron at number 1, Giannis number 2, I believe it was Kevin Durant at number 3, Kawhi at 4, and Steph Curry 5. Do you agree with that top 5 list?
I don't know if I'd have it in that order. I mean, I think Giannis right now is the best player. Some people might have, Kawhi Leonard for what he was able to do, but he's been hurt. He doesn't get to play all the time. Giannis has put together a year statistically. If you ask all the stat geeks and all those pencil protectors, they say it's one of the best seasons ever put together by a player. I know the problem I have with LeBron being the best is Anthony Davis's numbers are all better than LeBron's except for the assists. How can LeBron be the better player if Anthony Davis has better numbers across the board?
Do you think that maybe the reason why Anthony's numbers have went up is because of LeBron and he hasn't had a chance to play with a player of his caliber during the course of his career?
Yeah, I get that. But his numbers are still better than LeBron's. All of them.
Just say, hypothetically speaking, take LeBron away from the Lakers. Are the Lakers still a top team in the West?
Of course they are. With Anthony Davis, sure, they would still be in the hunt for the playoffs. I don't know if they would be the top team. But you take Anthony Davis off that team, and they wouldn't be the top team in the West.
You said they would not be the top team.
Would not. Absolutely not. We saw LeBron with those guys last year, and not even before the injuries. So I think LeBron needs Anthony Davis.
If the season were to resume today and the playoffs were to start, who do you have taking it off?
I have the Clippers, just like I had before. I think the Clippers are in a better spot than they were prior to the pandemic. They had Paul George banged up. They had Kawhi Leonard banged up. And now those guys should be healthy. It's been 10 weeks, almost 3 months. You put that squad healthy and as deep as it is. Look how deep the Clippers are. They play defense. They beat the Lakers 2 out of 3 times, even though they didn't have their full squad. They were able to handle the Lakers. I think the Clippers win the championship.
Who do you have the Clippers facing off against? Some would say the Bucks. Some would say the Celtics. Some might dare even say the Philadelphia 76ers, which I don't believe just because Embiid and Simmons don't know how to be grown men yet.
Yeah, no, I'm going to go with Milwaukee. I think Milwaukee is is a really good team out of the East. I'll pick Milwaukee losing to the Clippers. I know that ain't sexy for a lot of people, but the Clippers will wind up being sexy because I think that team is really, really good. Doc Rivers is leading it. What they did a year ago in the playoffs is what impressed me without any stars. They beat the Warriors twice in Oakland during the playoffs, and they didn't have a star, and now they have not one star, they have two stars. And they haven't been healthy all year. Even though they haven't been healthy all year, they were only like 5 games behind the Lakers. The Lakers should have run away with it considering how banged up the Clippers were and that this is a first year of chemistry and whatnot. But I still like them much better than the Lakers.
What is it like for you as somebody that has been covering this business for so long? What is it like for you to still be a very relevant journalist?
Fulfilling. 34 years. I was 22 years old when I started in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, covering high school sports. And you have to change and evolve. I have. When I started doing radio and television and I was in the newspaper business, I used to be criticized for doing radio and television. And I was one of the few people who were doing all of them at one time. And now it's commonplace. So you can't sit still. You can't live in the past. You have to be willing to move with the times and see what's going on. So to be able to be relevant and doing the stuff that I'm doing and being an analyst on all these different platforms, to write a column every week for Deadspin.com, to have a daily radio show on Fox Sports Radio every night with Chris Broussard, to be on Undisputed with Skip and Shannon, one of the hottest shows on television, to be on The Herd, both TV and radio, again, one of the best radio shows in the country. I mean, that's a blessing.
During the 34 years that you've been covering, you actually made history being, I believe it was the first African-American writer for a sports columnist. I want to say it was in Detroit.
Right, at the Detroit Free Press. When the paper hired me in 1993, I was the first black sports columnist the paper ever had. The paper was 161 years old when they hired me.
What was that experience like for you?
It was awesome. It's one of the moments that I'm most proud of in my career because they gave me an opportunity to have a voice for the fans and the people of Detroit. And the people of Detroit embraced me, and I love being there. I spent 20 years of my life in Detroit, and the people are great. The city's great. And to work for a newspaper of that caliber at that time in that situation was huge. I was a young guy. I was 29 years old. And I think at that time I had become the 10th black sports columnist in the entire country. And back then, there were 1,600 daily newspapers, and there were only 10 of us.
Wow. Sounds extremely intensifying, but to see what comes out of that is pretty cool. Earlier, you mentioned it's a lot of fun being on Undisputed with Skip and Shannon. What does it mean for you, though, when you're on that show and people are constantly wondering, what is Rob going to say? Like, what does that part mean for you?
No, I love it. You don't want to be predictable. You want to be out there where people aren't sure, on edge. What is he going to say? Who's he going to go after? What is he going to be funny? Is he going to have a prop to laugh at? Is Skip and Shannon? Can he stump Skip or Shannon? Like that? That's what it's all about, and makes people keep coming back. So you want to be predictable. You always want to be relevant. You want to have knowledge. I always want to be fun and informative. You should get something from me, when you watch me or when you listen. If I'm just regurgitating what everybody else is talking about and stuff that you read on the internet or heard from somebody else, then what was the point of listening to me?
What distinguishes you from the other well-known black journalists such as Chris Broussard, Mike Wilbon, and, of course, the guy Stephen A. Smith?
We're all different. We're all different. Everybody has their different take on it. I know all those guys really well. I just think from my standpoint, I'm a distinct voice. My voice is just different.
Absolutely.
I'm not the follow the crowd guy. I'm distinct that baseball's my number one. Most guys who are black, their number one isn't baseball. Very few people can talk about baseball, football, and basketball at the level that I can. And I'm proud of that because I've covered all the sports all three of them extensively for a long time. I have my baseball. I'm one of the few. There's less than 15 African Americans who have a baseball Hall of Fame vote. I have one. The same thing goes. I've been covering the NBA since 1987, covering the NFL since 1986, covering Major League Baseball since 1986. These are all things, and I've done them at all major papers. So I've seen a lot, been around a lot, offer a lot.
What advice would you offer to those young black journalists like myself that want to follow in your footsteps and covering major sports like the NBA?
The big thing is about you got to be willing to put in the work and the sacrifice. I think a lot of people are misguided when they think that their first stop is going to be ESPN or Fox Sports 1. That's not, or NBA TV. It's not your first step. All of us, everybody you see has put in time and energy and effort. And what are you going to be as far as what your expertise is? It's good to be well-rounded and know everything, but what is your expertise? And that's what you want to learn, to cover that. If it's the NBA, you need to cover the NBA. If it's the NFL, cover the NFL. Stephen A. Smith was a columnist, was a beat writer for newspapers. Skip Bayless was a columnist in Dallas and San Francisco and Chicago. Chris Broussard, worked in Cleveland and wrote for ESPN, the magazine, and the New York Times. Same thing. I worked for the Daily News in New York, Newsday, Detroit Free Press, Detroit News, Cincinnati Enquirer. That's what gives us the right or the ability to have a conversation and people want to hear what we're talking about. Why are you listening to Rob? Because he's covered sports for a long time and he's been around it. He has a different perspective. Anybody has an opinion, but if you can't back it up with facts and can't put it in a perspective, then it's not value.
It's not value. And, you got to be able to be somebody that is credible, and nobody else in this business. I can't say nobody else, but you're one of the most credible people in this business. You've been in it for over 30, years. With that experience, you actually just put out your book, correct?
Yeah, I have 2 books on Amazon.com. One is a collection of columns, and it's called If I'm Writing, I'm Ripping. And the other book that just dropped last week is called Rob Parker, Tales of Rob Parker's Urinating Mouse.
How did you come up with that name?
It's a collection of tweets from Twitter. And every time there's a big game or a big loss, I usually will say it's so quiet in that city that you can hear a mouse urinate on cotton or something that fits with that town. So I started doing it. It became really popular. So it's a collection of those tweets, and then I got an illustrator to draw out some illustrations to go along with the book. It's really a fun read. So if you get a chance, go to Amazon.com, and you can pick up either If I'm Writing, I'm Ripping, or Tales of Rob Parker's Urinating Mouse.
And you also have a podcast. I believe it's covering the MLB.
Yes, it's called Inside the Parker. It drops every Thursday. It's on the Herd Podcast Network. It's a 22-minute all baseball podcast. It's so much fun to listen to. This week we have Hall of Famer Rod Carew on the podcast. Again, very few baseball podcasts, and I might have the only one where a brother is doing a baseball podcast. So you want to check that out as well.
I love how you said you're one of the only brothers that got a podcast doing baseball. That's pretty cool. Before we get out of here, if anybody wanted to learn more about you or follow you, how can they do that?
They can go. I'm on Instagram and Twitter at Rob Parker FS1. Those are the best places to catch me.
Before we get out of here, give me your top 5 players, basketball players of all time.
I would say, let me see. Obviously, it's Michael. I would say Michael, LeBron, Kareem, Magic, and Will Chamberlain.
Exceptional top 5. Nothing else needs to be asked. Rob Parker, ladies and gentlemen, from The Odd Couple. Rob, thank you for your time today.
Always. Appreciate it. Best of luck to you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Be sure you guys like and share this video. Rob Parker on the Chris Gunther Show. Thank you for watching. See you next time.